You know those weird little moments we've all had? The ones where things line up in a way that's just a little too perfect to ignore. Like you're humming a song you haven't heard in years and suddenly it comes on the radio. Or you bump into an old friend in a city you're both just visiting. What if those aren't just random little glitches in the matrix?
Have you ever had one of those coincidences that just completely stops you in your tracks? One that feels so specific, so personal, that just shrugging it off as chance doesn't feel right at all? Yeah, that's exactly the kind of feeling we're going to dive into today. All right, let's get right into it with a story from an author, Jimmy Perez, that just perfectly captures this. It's a fantastic example of a moment that seems to, well, defy all logic. So picture this. Perez is writing, and he's exploring this pretty deep idea. The concept that our physical bodies are basically just vessels, temporary vehicles for a consciousness that's way bigger than us. But then he adds his own unique twist. He imagines God not as some old, distant figure, but as a playful child experiencing the world through our eyes, almost like a game. It's a very specific, kind of quirky idea that he felt was totally his own.
So, the very next day, something impossible happens. He's listening to an audiobook, and this part is absolutely crucial. This isn't some recommendation from an algorithm that's been listening to him. We're talking about an old book on tape from a time way before our phones could spy on our thoughts.
And then he hears it. The narrator in the audiobook says almost the exact same thing he had just written down. The body as a vehicle and God as a child playing through us. His own words here really capture the shock. It was as if the author had read my words before I wrote them. I mean, can you imagine? To just chalk that up to coincidence, it just didn't sit right. It was way too specific. And that's what led him down a rabbit hole, asking some much, much deeper questions about what was really going on. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because you have to remember, all our usual explanations, targeted ads, predictive AI, all that stuff, they just don't work here. This was a totally analog, disconnected experience. It had to be something else. So where does your mind go? His first thought was maybe this is a sign. A little nod from the universe, a whisper saying, hey, you're onto something here, keep going. Or, he thought, maybe it's even bigger than that. What if this idea wasn't really his at all? What if it's an ancient truth that just pops up now and then, waiting for different people and different times to tune into it? And then there's the third possibility, which is a real mind bender. What if our thoughts aren't just stuck in our heads? What if they operate on a certain frequency, and his mind and this other author's mind just happen to tune into the very same channel, completely outside the normal flow of time? This whole wild experience pushed him to look for a whole new framework for these moments. He realized that to really get it, we might need a better word, something that goes way beyond just coincidence. And this brings us to a really key distinction. On one side, you've got coincidence. That's just random chance, right? A statistical blip that doesn't mean anything. But on the other side, you have synchronicity, and that implies a connection that feels meaningful, like it happened for a reason. So let's put an official name to it. This idea of synchronicity actually comes from the famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung. He described it as moments that seem connected in a really meaningful way, but there's no obvious cause and effect. It's when your inner world, your thoughts and feelings, suddenly and strangely lines up with the outer world. Okay, so if these moments aren't just random, what are they? Well, according to Perez, they might just be a form of communication, a kind of universal language. And here is his core idea, right here. He believes these synchronicities aren't just weird glitches. They're messages, a way for the universe or God, or whatever you want to call it, to speak to us directly. And what are these messages about? Well, according to this view, they're not just random chatter. They carry some of the most important things we look for in life. A sense of meaning when we feel lost, a little guidance when we're at a crossroads, and a feeling of purpose, confirming we're on the right track. So this is the big question, isn't it? If the universe is speaking, how do we get better at actually hearing what it has to say? Because it's one thing to notice something weird happen, but it's another thing entirely to understand the message.
And that's really the challenge here. The author figures that his real job isn't just to be surprised by these moments anymore. It's to actively start trying to figure out what they mean.
And his approach is beautifully simple. It's a two-step process. First, you have to listen with openness. That means fighting the urge to immediately write it off as nothing. And second, you listen with intention. You actively ask yourself, okay, what could this mean for me right now?
So, why does all this matter? Well, the goal is to become fluent in this quiet, subtle language. It's about gaining the wisdom to really hear and understand the messages that the universe might be sending our way.
Which really just leaves us with one last fascinating question to chew on. The next time one of those strange coincidences stops you in your tracks, instead of just shrugging it off, maybe just pause for a second and ask yourself, what is the universe trying to tell me?